Martha Redfern stood in the churchyard with the whole town looking at her like she was something dragged in from the road and left where decent folks had to step around it. The sun stood high over Lander, Wyoming, white and mean, in a cloudless sky. Heat shimmered above the packed dirt street, bent the edges of the church roof, and made the iron latch on the gate too hot to touch for long. A wagon wheel creaked somewhere behind her. A mule brayed once and fell silent, as if even the animals knew this was not a day for ordinary noise. Martha kept her hands folded in front of her brown cotton dress. The dress had been let out twice at the seams. She had done the work herself by lamplight in the back room of Mrs. Hester Vale's boarding house, pulling the needle through old fabric while Hester sighed loud enough in the hallway for Martha to hear. Nothing in town had been cut for a woman her size. Nothing in town had ever been cut for her life either. She had buried a husband. She had buried a baby girl so small the pine box had looked like a cruel mistake. She had paid creditors with coins she had earned washing other women's sheets. She had eaten shame cold and plain for breakfast so many mornings that it no longer surprised her. But standing there while Lander watched her be handed to a man she had never met, she felt something inside her go still in a way that was almost dangerous. A woman can be handed over like property, but that does not make her one. The thought came clear and hard, and she held to it the way a drowning person holds to a board. The town council had made its decision 4 days earlier. Martha Redfern had no income, no kin, no land, and no respectable future anyone cared to imagine. Elias Crowheart had a failing ranch along the Wind River foothills, a leg ruined by a fence accident, and no woman to keep house through cattle season. The council called it mercy. Some called it efficiency. Martha knew better. It was disposal dressed up in church clothes. The women stood near the steps with their fans moving slow. Their eyes moved faster. Hester Vale stood among them in a gray dress too fine for the heat, her mouth pinched small as a button. "Poor Mr. Crowheart," someone whispered. Poor, another woman answered. "He must be desperate clear through." A man near the hitching rail laughed under his breath. "That ranch of his must be worse off than I heard." "She's buried one husband already," another said. "Maybe Crowheart ought to watch what she feeds him." The laughter came easy. Martha did not look at them. She had learned long ago that some people wanted your pain only if they could see it on your face. She would not feed them. She put one foot forward. The dirt shifted beneath her shoe. The church door stood open dark inside. Cooler maybe, though she doubted God had made any special arrangement for comfort that morning. She had nearly reached the gate when a voice cut across the yard. "If you've got something to say, say it where she can hear you and where I can answer for it." The voice was low, not shouted. That made it worse. The laughter stopped. Martha turned her head. A man stood beside a weathered wagon near the far edge of the yard. Tall, broad through the shoulders, sun had browned his face and forearms until he looked carved from old saddle leather. His hat shaded his eyes, but not enough to hide the hard line of his gaze as it moved from one man to another. Elias Crowheart. He leaned just slightly on his left side, not enough to ask pity. Enough to tell the truth. One leg did not trust him fully, and he had learned to stand around it. There was no softness in him that Martha could see, no welcome, no gladness, but there was a kind of justice in the set of his jaw. One of the men at the rail looked down at his boots. Elias waited another moment. "Didn't think so," he said. Then he pushed away from the wagon and walked toward the church, uneven but steady. His limp had a hard rhythm to it, as if every step had been argued with and won. He did not look at Martha until he reached the gate. When he did, his eyes were gray and tired. "Mrs. Redfern," he said. "Not yet," Martha answered. Something moved in his face. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. It was gone too quickly to name. "No," he said, "not yet." He opened the gate and stepped aside. She looked at the church door, then at the watching town. "I have walked alone a long time, Mr. Crowheart," she said. "I expect I can manage these steps." He nodded once. "I expect you can." He did not offer his arm. He did not force kindness where it had not been asked. He simply walked beside her close enough that no one could pretend she entered alone. The preacher was young and sweating under his collar. His name was Reverend Bellows, and he had come west only that spring, still new enough to believe dignity could be preserved by speaking carefully. Martha gave him credit for trying. The ceremony was short. Elias said his vows in a flat, plain voice. Martha said hers without trembling. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, no one clapped. No one cried. No one blessed the union except the reverend, and even he looked as if he knew the blessing had work ahead of it. Outside, the town had arranged itself to watch them leave. Hester Vale stepped forward first. "Well," she said, smiling with no warmth in it, "I suppose both of you will make the best of what Providence has allowed. Mr. Crowheart, we do hope your ranch improves. And Martha—" Her eyes moved down Martha's body and back up again. "I trust you will find your footing." Martha felt Elias stop beside her. "She found it before any of you thought to look," he said. Hester's smile stiffened. Martha did not thank him. Not then. Gratitude was too expensive to spend on a man she did not know. The wagon ride out of Lander took them past the last store, the smithy, the freight office, and then into open country where the land widened under a punishing sky. The Wind River ran somewhere north of them, hidden by cottonwoods and low banks, but the country around the road looked thirsty. Sagebrush hunched gray and bitter over the dirt. Grass lay yellow and thin. In the distance, the foothills rose blue-brown and silent. For a long while, neither of them spoke. At last, Elias said, "There's water in the back. Thank you. It'll be near 2 hours. I've sat longer in worse places." He glanced at her, then back to the team. "I don't doubt it." The words were not tender, but they were not mocking either. By the time Crowheart Creek Ranch appeared through the heat shimmer, Martha's back ached from the wagon bench, and sweat had dried salt stiff at her collar. She looked ahead and understood at once why the town had been so willing to solve Elias's problem by giving him hers. The ranch was failing. The house leaned tiredly into itself, needing work along the east wall and roofline. The barn door hung crooked. A water trough near the corral had split down the center dark with old leakage. 2 fence sections lay broken where cattle had pushed through or men had stopped caring. The garden plot beside the kitchen was nothing but cracked earth-dead stems and a scarecrow with one sleeve hanging like a surrender flag. 3 ranch hands sat in the narrow shade by the barn. One was young and red-haired, one old and gray-bearded one, hardly more than a boy. They rose when the wagon came in, not quickly. Elias saw Martha looking. His hands tightened on the reins. "It looks worse than it is," he said. Martha looked at the broken trough, the sagging fence, the thin cattle standing motionless in the heat. "Does it?" A long silence passed between them. "No," he said. "It looks about like it is." Martha turned toward him then. That was the first honest thing anyone had given her all day. The red-haired hand came forward and took the team's heads. "Boss," he said. His eyes flicked toward Martha, then away. This her Elias's voice hardened. "Her name is Mrs. Crowheart. You'll use it." The young man flushed clear to the ears. "Yes, sir. Welcome, Mrs. Crowheart. I'm Tommy Pike." "Martha," she said. "Where's the kitchen, Tommy?" He blinked. "Ma'am, the kitchen." He pointed toward the side of the house. She climbed down without waiting for help. Her knees complained when her shoes hit dirt, but she kept that to herself. She took her small bundle from the wagon and walked toward the house. Behind her, she heard one of the hands mutter low. She didn't catch the words. She knew the shape of them well enough. The kitchen had been neglected so long it seemed to have stopped expecting use. Ash filled the stove belly. Grease marked the wall near the cook surface. The shelves were confused with old sacks, empty tins, and one cracked jar of beans. The flour bin was low. The water bucket was dry. A dead fly lay in the sugar. Martha set down her bundle. Then she rolled up her sleeves. By the time Elias came in, the floor had been swept. The stove cleared, the water bucket filled, and a pot set to boil. Martha had tied on an apron she found behind the pantry door. It was too small, but it served. He stopped just inside the doorway. "You didn't have to start tonight. I couldn't cook on that stove the way it was. You don't have to cook tonight." She looked at his leg, then at the sweat standing along his temple. "Sit down, Mr. Crowheart." His brow lowered slightly. "You've been standing on that leg since before sunup," she said. "Sit down. There'll be food in 40 minutes. For a moment she thought he might argue. Then the chair scraped against the floor and he sat. The house filled with ordinary sounds. Fire catching, water heating, knife on board, spoon against pot. Outside, men moved in the yard, low-voiced and careful. A household Martha thought did not come alive all at once. It came back sound by sound. At supper, she fed Elias and the 3 hands beans, fried cornmeal, and coffee, strong enough to hold up a horseshoe. The men ate like they had forgotten food could be hot. After the hands left, Elias remained at the table. The lamplight showed the lines around his eyes more clearly. "I'll speak plain," he said. "I didn't marry you for love." Martha set down her fork. "I married you because this ranch needs a woman running the house, and I can't keep up with that and cattle both. Not with this leg. That's the truth of it." "I know," Martha said. He watched her. "I didn't marry you for love either," she continued. I married you because I owed 4 months at the boarding house, had no kin to write to, and the town had run out of patience, pretending charity was Christian. His mouth tightened, not quite a smile. So we understand each other, he said. We understand the beginning, Martha answered. He looked at her for a long moment. She picked up her fork again. I'll need to see the ledgers after breakfast. The ledgers, yes. Why? Because fences do not fall down alone, cattle do not thin without reason, and kitchens do not go empty unless money has gone somewhere first. The quiet after that was different from the quiet before. At last Elias said, They're in the office. They're not in good order. I expect not. There's a man in town helps with them. Silas Vane, land agent. He's handled things since my accident. Martha lowered her eyes to her plate so he would not see too much in her face. Then I'll start with what he handled. That night in the small room off the kitchen, Martha lay on a rope bed under air too hot to breathe properly. Through the window the Wyoming sky glittered with hard stars. She listened to the board settle the horses, shift the faint sound of Elias's uneven step somewhere beyond the wall. She should have been afraid. She was in a stranger's house, married to a man she did not know on land that looked one dry wind away from ruin. But fear had never been useful for long. She thought instead of the ledger she had glimpsed on Elias's desk before supper. A line for feed costs that seemed too high. A cattle tally that did not sit right. A water fee marked in a hand too neat to belong to a working rancher. Silas Vane. The name settled in her mind like a burr in wool. Martha closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Years ago she had failed to see the shape of a lie until her first husband was dead and creditors were already at the door. She had learned then that ruin did not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it came dressed in tidy numbers in a helpful man's handwriting. By midnight she knew one thing with a certainty that made the dark feel colder. Crowheart Creek Ranch was not simply dying. Someone was helping it along. Martha was awake before the first pale seam of light showed over the Wind River foothills. The house was still dark, but not silent. Old boards shifted in the cooling air. Somewhere beyond the kitchen wall, a horse stamped once in the yard. Farther off, a night bird gave one lonely call and then stopped as if the coming heat had already laid its hand over the land. She lay still on the rope bed, staring at the low ceiling, with Silas Vane's name turning in her mind. By the time Elias came through the kitchen door, washed from the pump with his hair damp and his shirt collar open, coffee was already made. Biscuits were in the oven and Martha had the stove burning clean. He stopped just inside the doorway when he smelled it. A man didn't have to say he had gone too long without a cared-for morning. His face said it before his mouth found word. Morning, he said. Morning. He sat down carefully, easing his bad leg beneath the table. Martha poured coffee and set it before him. The ledgers are in the office, he said after the first swallow. I'll show you when the men are fed. Thank you. They're not in good order. You told me. Silas has kept them better than I did after the accident. Or I thought he had. Elias looked down into his cup. He's a land agent, knows filings, banks, county offices, helped me when I couldn't make it into town regular. Martha turned a pan of biscuits with a cloth around her hand. A helpful man is a comfort. Elias glanced at her. You say that like you don't mean it. I say it like I've lived long enough to know help should still be counted. He said nothing to that. After breakfast, he led her to the small office at the front of the house. Dust lay along the window sash. A rifle hung above the door. The desk was scarred with old knife marks and dark rings from coffee cups. On one side sat the ledgers, 3 thick books bound in cracked brown leather. Beside them rested a receipt box with one broken corner. Elias stood in the doorway as if he had brought her to his sickbed. I'll be by the barn, he said. I'll close the door to keep the heat off the paper. He nodded and left her there. Martha sat. For a moment she did not open the books. She placed both hands flat on the desk and let the quiet settle. Numbers required patience. Lies, if they were there, did not always leap from the page. They sat politely in columns, wearing the same ink as honest work. Then she opened the first ledger. She began with feed. Last summer, $12 a month. This summer, $28. Same supplier, same herd size, at least according to the spring count. Her finger moved slowly down. The page stopped, moved again. She opened the receipt box. The receipts did not match, not by a little, by enough. A supplier receipt for June showed $12.50. The ledger showed $19. July showed the same. August again, $6.50 gone each month, clean as a bone, picked by coyotes. Martha wrote the figures on a sheet of paper in 2 columns. Receipt, ledger, difference. Then she turned to cattle counts, 42 head in spring, 35 in fall, no sale, no death loss, no note of strays recovered or lost. The year before showed the same kind of wound, not many at once, 4 here, 6 there, enough to hurt, not enough to shout. Her chest tightened, but her hand stayed steady. At the bottom of one page beneath water fees, she found 3 payments marked under private agreement. The name beside them was Silas Vane, $15, $15, $15, no county seal, no clerk's notation, no official receipt. Martha leaned back. The room was already warming. A fly worried against the window. Outside, she heard Tommy Pike laugh at something near the barn. Then Elias's lower voice giving an order. Ordinary ranch sounds, men working under a sky that did not care whether a ranch lived or failed. She looked down at the neat handwriting in the ledger. Men can dress a lie in good manners, but numbers have no manners at all. The thought came with such cold certainty that she dipped the pen again and kept writing. Near noon, while she was hanging wet dish towels on the line behind the kitchen, she heard a horse come in at a confident trot. Not the weary plod of a ranch hand, not the hurried ride of a man bringing trouble. This was the arrival of someone who wanted his presence known. A warm voice called across the yard. "Tommy Pike, is that sunburn still peeling, or did you finally grow a new neck?" Tommy laughed. "Better than it was, Mr. Vane." Martha kept her hands on the towel she was pinning. "Well now," the man said after a moment. "You must be Mrs. Crowheart." She turned. Silas Vane stood a few steps away, hat held politely in both hands. He was perhaps 45, dressed in a dark vest too fine for ranch dust and boots polished past usefulness. His face had the practiced openness of a man who had spent years learning how to seem harmless. His smile was warm. His eyes were not. "Mr. Vane," Martha said. "Silas, if you like. Elias and I have been friends a long while." "Then Mr. Vane will do until I've known you a long while too." Something small shifted behind his smile. "Fair enough," he said. "I only heard yesterday about the marriage. Elias keeps his cards close. I hope you'll find Crowheart Creek comfortable once it's had a woman's hand about it. The house is not the only thing needing order." His smile held, but it held tighter. "No, ma'am. Drought's been hard on everybody. I've done what I can to keep Elias from being buried under the business side." That was generous. Neighborly, he said. A man gets hurt, friends step in. Before Martha could answer, Elias came around the barn with his sleeves rolled and dust on his face. The change in him when he saw Silas was plain. Not joy exactly. Relief. Familiarity. A door opening and a closed man. Silas. "Elias!" Silas crossed the yard and shook his hand firmly. "Came to talk over the water renewal. County dates don't wait for lame legs or summer heat." Elias accepted the words without hearing the hook in them. They went inside together. Martha made dinner and listened to the office door stand not quite shut. She caught only pieces. "Filing. Boundary language. No need for you to write in. I'll handle the clerk. Trust me on this. Trust me." She put the knife down carefully. At the table, Silas charmed the men. He asked Jesse Mora about his shoulder-teased Pete Calder about learning to mend a fence before growing a full beard, and praised Martha's biscuits with just enough sincerity to make refusal look rude. Then he turned to her. "Elias tells me you've been looking at the account books." The table quieted by 1 degree. "I like to know how a household runs," Martha said. "Of course. Though ranch books can look tangled if a person doesn't know the system. I noticed the feed costs rose. Drought." Silas said smoothly. "Prices are up from here to Cheyenne. I've been bargaining hard on Elias's behalf. Same supplier, for now. Reliable men are worth paying." Martha nodded. That must be it. Across the table, Elias watched her in a way he had not watched her yesterday. Silas left after dinner with a folded paper bearing Elias's signature. Martha stood at the kitchen doorway and watched him ride out. "You don't trust him," Elias said behind her. She did not turn. "I do not know him well enough. That wasn't what your face said." "My face has been accused of many things, Martha." She turned then. Elias stood close to the table, his arms crossed, his weight shifted off the bad leg. "I found differences in the ledgers," she said. "Feed receipts that do not match entries, cattle counts that lose animals without sale or death, water fees paid through private agreement." His jaw tightened. "Silas has handled those accounts for 2 years. I know. He helped me keep this place standing. Maybe he did." She held his eyes. Maybe he helped himself while he did it. Anger flashed across his face, but beneath it she saw fear, not fear of her, fear of the world shifting under him again. I need more than suspicion, she said. Give me 3 days before I say a hard thing about a man you trust. After a long moment, Elias nodded. 3 days. That afternoon, she rode the mule into Lander under the excuse of buying flour. She bought it first, so the sack would be honest, then walked to the county office. The clerk looked at her size, her plain dress and the patched cuff at her wrist before he looked at her face. Martha had lived through that order of looking many times. I need the water filings for Crowheart Creek Ranch, she said. Those are official records. I expect that is why they are kept here. A small sound came from the back room. A woman carrying folded linens paused in the doorway. She was narrow-faced with tired blue eyes and red hands roughened by soap. Old deed books are on the lower shelf, Mr. Peel, the woman said. Renewals in the green cabinet. The clerk frowned. Thank you, Nellie. Nellie Frost looked at Martha for one brief second. Not pity, recognition. The original deed described water access along both forks of Crowheart Creek, upper and lower, clear as morning. The renewal filing copied in Silas Vane's fine hand named only the lower fork. Martha read it twice. The upper fork watered the main grazing pasture. Without it, the ranch would have to buy access, sell cattle, or sell land. In a drought year, water was not convenience. It was breath. Nellie came near while the clerk stamped another paper. You'll want a copy of both, she said softly. Yes. And if someone tells you the difference is just wording, it isn't. Martha looked at her. Nellie folded the linens against her chest. I copied filings here 3 winters. Men hide knives in words all the time. On the road home, Martha met Taza Red Willow near the cottonwoods where the creek road bent east. He sat a paint horse as if he and the animal had come to an agreement years ago and saw no need to revise it. Elias had mentioned him at breakfast, a Shoshone horseman who came and went with work weather and his own judgment. You are Crowheart's wife, he said. Martha. Taza Red Willow. She nodded toward the creek. Do Elias's cattle water at the upper fork? Always. He looked toward the low trees. Before Crowheart bought the place, cattle watered there. Before cattle, elk. Before elk, our grandfathers knew that bend. Have you seen anyone near the upper gate lately? His eyes narrowed slightly. 2 riders, 3 nights ago. Not Crowheart's men. Would you say that before a judge? If truth is asked, I say truth. He paused. Water remembers its path. Men are the ones who pretend not to. By sundown, Martha had the papers spread across the kitchen table. Elias read them slowly. She watched his face as the numbers struck him one by one. Feed, cattle, bank entries, water. When he reached the altered boundary, his whole body went still. The upper fork, he said. Yes, that's the herd. Yes. His hand closed into a fist on the table. I trusted him. You were hurt and alone. I signed what he put in front of me. He chose the moment to put it there. Elias looked at her then, and something in his guarded face cracked just enough for pain to show through. What do? We go to the bank. We send for a lawyer. We contest the filing before the deadline. Before dawn, hoofbeats tore Martha out of sleep. She reached the window in time to see 2 riders vanish down the upper road. Tommy's shout came from the yard. Mrs. Crowheart, the water gates cut. Martha was dressed before the echo died. By the time she reached the porch, Elias was already limping toward his horse, pale with rage and pain. Cattle are through the eastern draw, Tommy called. If they get too far in this heat, ride, Martha said. They rode. She stood alone in the gray morning and watched dust lift behind them. Then she went back inside, gathered every receipt, every note, every copied filing, wrapped them in oilskin, tied them tight, and buried them deep beneath the flour in the bin. Only then did she light the stove. The men would come back hungry, angry, and tired, and the truth would still be waiting. The men came back from the eastern draw looking as if the land had chewed them up and spit them out dry. Elias rode in first, sitting stiff in the saddle, his bad leg hanging wrong in the stirrup, and his face drawn tight with pain he would rather have swallowed than named. Dust clung to his shirt and beard stubble. Sweat had cut pale tracks down his temples. Behind him came Tommy Pike with his hat gone and his red hair darkened flat against his skull. Then Jesse Mora with his gray beard full of grit. Pete Calder blinking hard like a boy trying not to show he had been frightened, and Taza Red Willow last, leading a trembling steer with a rope around its horns. Martha stood at the porch rail with one hand against the post. She counted them before anyone spoke. Elias slid down from the saddle too fast for his leg and caught himself on the horn. Tommy moved toward him. Elias waved him off. 14 got through, he said. Martha waited. We brought 11 back. The morning seemed to grow quieter around the words. The horses breathed hard. A fly moved along the porch rail. Somewhere near the corral, one of the recovered cattle bawled in a long, cracked voice. 3 lost, Martha said. 3 gone far enough they won't last in this heat. Elias pulled off his hat and wiped his face with his sleeve. Gate was cut clean. I know. His eyes lifted to hers. I saw the riders. Tommy's face went white under the dust. You saw them. 2. Before sunup. They wanted distance before daylight. Taza stepped down from his horse and looked toward the upper road. They knew which gate to cut, knew the herd would drift east. Elias looked as if he might say Silas's name and then decided the name deserved no air yet. Martha turned toward the open kitchen door. Food is ready. Coffee too. No one argued. They ate in silence at first, bent over plates as men do when anger has not yet found language. Martha had fried cornmeal beans and the last of the bacon ends. She poured coffee strong and black. Elias wrapped both hands around his cup but didn't drink. His fingers trembled once and then stilled. The papers, he asked quietly. Safe, where somewhere a man like Silas Vane would never put his hands unless he planned to bake bread. For the first time that morning, Tommy made a sound almost like a laugh, but it died quickly. Elias looked toward the flour bin, then back at her. Something passed across his face that was not relief alone. Trust maybe, though, still knew enough to hurt. We go to the bank today, Martha said. You revoke whatever authority he has over the account. Then Tommy rides for Cody. I can ride now, Tommy said, pushing back his chair. You can finish breakfast, Martha said. You're no good to anyone fainting on the road. Jesse grunted. She's right. Tommy sat down again. Elias looked at Martha across the table. You've thought it all through, she said. I've thought through what the facts allow. The rest we meet as it comes. The Ash Creek Savings and Loan sat on the corner of Landers Main Street with a narrow door, 2 tall windows, and a ceiling fan inside that turned slow enough to mock the heat. The banker, Mr. Lyle Peel's cousin by marriage, Gerald Fitch, had the face of a man who preferred accounts to people. Because accounts did not ask questions with blood in them. He greeted Elias carefully. Mr. Crowheart. Full account statement, Elias said. 3 years. Every withdrawal, every deposit. Bank stamp on each page. Fitch's eyes moved to Martha and away again. That may take some time. We'll wait, Elias said. They waited in 2 wooden chairs by the wall. Martha sat with her hands folded over the flour sack she had brought as an excuse, though there was nothing in it now but air. Elias stared at the floorboards. After a while, he said low, If this proves what you think, I signed the door open for him. You signed papers while you were hurt and trusting the wrong man. That does not make me less a fool. No, Martha said. It makes him more wicked. He looked at her then. You speak like you know that road. I do. She did not say more, and he did not press. That was one of the better things about Elias Crowheart. He knew when a closed door was not locked forever, only not ready to open. Fitch returned with the statements. Martha read them at the counter while Elias stood beside her. She moved through the columns 1 line at a time. March, April, May, feed, hardware, county filing, cash withdrawal. Her finger stopped. September 14th, she said, $80. Fitch cleared his throat. That was made under Mr. Vane's management authority. How many withdrawals under that authority? Elias asked. Fitch's mouth tightened. 11. How much? $230 over 2 years. The number sat between them like a loaded gun. Elias's voice went flat. Show me the authority document. It was worse than Martha expected and exactly what she expected. Broad wording, neat legal phrases, enough room for a dishonest man to walk through smiling. Can it be revoked? She asked. At any time, Fitch said. Then bring the form. Elias signed it without hesitation. When they stepped back into the blinding street, he stood still with his hat in his hand and his jaw working. He sat at my table, he said. Drank my coffee. Told me last spring I ought to consider selling before debt took the choice from me. He was making the debt. Yes, the word was barely sound. Tommy rode for Cody before dusk with a letter tucked under his shirt and $15 gathered from Martha's last hidden envelope and Elias's strongbox. By then, Nellie Frost had quietly sent a message through a freight driver she trusted saying a lawyer named Daniel Reeves would take urgent ranch matters if paid enough to ride hard and sleep little. Silas moved faster than they hoped and slower than Martha feared. By noon the following day, word came through Hank Doyle from the barber shop that Silas had spent nearly an hour inside the sheriff's office speaking of defamation, false accusations, and a desperate new wife stirring trouble in a house she had entered by charity. Elias listened with both hands flat on the kitchen table. "He's getting ahead of us," Jesse said from the corner. "He is trying to," Martha said. Elias looked at her. "What do you need?" The question mattered. Martha heard it and understood that something had changed. Not everything. Enough. "Sit beside me when the time comes," she said. "Let me speak when the numbers are mine to speak. And when they try to make me small, do not give them anger to point at." His eyes darkened. "They will try." A man like Silas does not fight the truth first. He fights the person holding it. Elias looked down at his hands, scarred and sun-browned, made for ropewood cattle in weather. "I'm not sure I can sit still for that." "Truth does not need a loud voice," Martha said. "It only needs someone willing to stand beside it." He lifted his eyes. "I will," he said. Daniel Reeves arrived 2 days later in a dust-colored coat, spectacles smudged from the road, and a leather case tied behind his saddle. He was younger than Martha expected, but his eyes were sharp, and he shook her hand with the same seriousness he gave Elias. He worked at the kitchen table until lamplight replaced day. Martha laid out the receipt statements, cattle counts, water filings, and her notes. Reeves asked questions. She answered without reaching for the papers more than twice. At length he leaned back. "Mrs. Crowhart, you are going to testify." Elias stiffened. "Is that wise?" "It is necessary," Reeves said. "She knows the evidence better than I do. The judge will hear plain sense if it is spoken plainly." "They will attack her," Elias said. "Yes," Reeves answered, "and if she stands through it, they will wish they had stayed with the numbers." The courthouse was full by 10 that Thursday. The town that had watched Martha enter a church as unwanted property now watched her enter a courtroom, carrying a folder tied with brown string. Silas Vane sat at the opposite table beside a silver-haired lawyer from Cheyenne. He looked at Martha and smiled as if they were old friends meeting under unfortunate confusion. She did not smile back. Judge Harlow heard the water issue first. Reeves laid out the original deed, the renewal filing, and the missing upper fork. Silas's lawyer called it clerical language. Harlow's eyes narrowed, but he let him talk. Then Martha was called. She stood with every gaze on her. Hester Vale sat in the third row, lips pressed thin. Sheriff Grady leaned against the back wall. Tommy stood near the door with his hat crushed in both hands. Taza sat still as stone beside Jesse. Martha opened the folder and began. She explained the feed receipts against the ledger, the bank withdrawals against ranch expenses, the missing cattle tallies, the water boundary change. She did not dress the facts up. She did not beg them to be believed. She simply set them down one by one until the room grew quiet under their weight. Silas's lawyer rose. "Mrs. Crowhart, you have no formal training in accounting, correct? Number, no legal schooling number. You have been married to Mr. Crowhart less than 3 weeks. Yes, you arrived in this county with no property, no money, and no standing, and now you present yourself as the savior of a ranch you barely knew existed a month ago." Elias's hand closed on the table. Martha did not look at him. The lawyer smiled. "Isn't it possible you found these so-called problems because you needed to prove your value in a marriage arranged out of charity?" The room held its breath. Martha looked at him. "I did not find problems to justify my presence," she said. "I found the truth because I compared the receipts to the ledger. That is not ambition. That is arithmetic." A sound moved through the room, low, uneasy, real. The lawyer tried again, but the ground had shifted under him. Nellie Frost testified that Martha had obtained the filings properly and that the change in boundary was plain. Taza Red Willow testified that the upper fork had always watered the ranch cattle and that he had seen riders near the gate before it was cut. Fitch admitted a suspicious withdrawal had once been questioned and then cleared after Silas spoke privately with him. A neighboring rancher stood and confessed he had found a similar small discrepancy in Silas's handling, but had let it pass. By the time Judge Harlow removed his spectacles, Silas Vane was no longer smiling. "The water renewal is void," Harlow said. "The original deed stands. Crowhart Creek Ranch retains access to both forks." Elias exhaled once beside Martha. "As for the financial matter, this court finds sufficient evidence of unauthorized activity to refer Mr. Vane for criminal review. He is to hold no authority over Mr. Crowhart's accounts filings, cattle water rights, or land from this hour forward." The gavel struck. No one cheered. The silence was too full for that. Outside in the courthouse hall, Elias stood beside Martha while people passed them without quite knowing how to speak. Hester Vale looked at Martha once and looked away. Elias's shoulder nearly touched hers. When he said those things, he said quietly, "I wanted to break his teeth." "I know, you told me not to. You listened." He turned toward her. His face was tired open and changed. "I see you," he said. "Not the way they saw you. Not the way I first thought I understood you. I see you as you are." Martha held the folder against her chest. "Do not make promises in hallways. It is not a promise," Elias said. "It is a fact." On the ride home, neither spoke for a long time. The wagon wheels turned through dust and heat. The foothills waited ahead, and beyond them Crowheart Creek ran thin but living through the land they had just kept. When the ranch came into view, Martha looked at the broken trough, the patched fence, the kitchen window she had cleaned, and the dry garden waiting for water. It no longer looked like a place she had been sent. It looked like something she had fought for. The ride back from Lander was quieter than the ride that had first brought Martha Redfern to Crowheart Creek Ranch. That first time she had sat beside Elias as a woman delivered by town decision, with no claim except need, and no welcome except a stranger's plain decency. Now the same road ran beneath the wagon wheels, the same sagebrush crouched gray under the same hard sky, but something in the air had changed. The heat still pressed down. The land was still dry. The creek still ran thin, yet Martha held the document folder in her lap like something alive, and Elias sat beside her with both hands on the reins, looking ahead as if seeing the road for the first time after a long fever. For 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Elias said, "Reeves thinks the criminal review will take months." Martha looked at the dust rising behind the horses. "Most things worth setting right take longer than folks prefer. He said Silas may try to settle. He will." Elias glanced at her. "You sound certain. Men like Silas are brave while the cost belongs to someone else." A dry wind moved across the road and lifted the edge of Martha's sleeve. Elias worked the reins gently around a rut. "The water is ours," he said. "Yes, the judge made that clean." He did. Elias nodded once, but the motion carried no triumph. It carried exhaustion, and under that the slow beginning of belief. When the ranch came into sight, Martha felt a pull in her chest she had not expected. The house still needed boards along the east wall. The barn still leaned. The garden was still more stubborn effort than promise. But the kitchen window she had washed caught the late light. The repaired section of fence held straight. The cattle stood inside land that still had water by law and right. It no longer looked like a place she had been sent. It looked like a place that had begun to know her hand. Tommy had the horses watered before Elias could protest. Jesse had supper started, a pot of beans and cornmeal bread warming near the stove. Pete was working at the broken trough with more determination than skill. Taza Red Willow stood by the corral, one hand resting on the top rail, watching the herd with the stillness of a man who trusted silence more than speech. When Martha climbed down from the wagon, Taza nodded toward the folder in her arms. "Paper held today," he said. "Paper and truth." Martha answered. "Truth was older," Taza said. "Paper had to catch up." That evening, after the men had eaten and the house had settled into lamplight, Martha went to the office, not to review Silas Vane's theft, not to relive the courthouse. She had done enough looking backward for one day. She took out a clean sheet of paper and began writing. Ledger categories, monthly receipt checks, bank authorization limits, cattle tally dates, water filing review every spring. Vendor comparison before winter feed orders. She wrote slowly, carefully, each line aboard in the frame of something meant to stand. The ranch had survived one thief. That did not mean it was safe from bad weather, poor prices, sickness, drought, or human carelessness. Winning in court was only the stopping of a wound. Healing required order. Elias appeared in the doorway near midnight. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you. What are you doing?" "Making sure nobody ever steals this ranch twice the same way." He came in and stood behind her chair. She let him read. His shadow fell across the paper, tall and quiet. After a while he said, "You've been thinking on this a while, since the second day." "The second day, that was when I knew the books were wrong." He was silent long enough that she turned. He was looking not at the paper now, but at her. "When the council sent you here," he said, "I thought I was getting a woman who needed a roof." "You did. I thought I was giving one." "You were." His jaw worked. He lowered himself into the chair across from the desk, careful with his leg. The lamp flame stood between them. "That was not all," he said. Martha set the pen down. "No," she said, "it was not." He looked at his hands. "I don't know how to say things in a way that makes them pretty. I have had enough pretty lies." That brought his eyes back to hers. "I want you here," he said. Not because the town decided it, not because you have nowhere else, not because I need help with a stove or ledger or cattle count. I want you here because this place is better with you in it, and I am better for having had to stand beside you." Martha's throat tightened, but she kept her face steady. She had learned not to reach too fast for gentleness. Gentleness in her life had too often been followed by a bill. "Elias Crowheart," she said, "if you are asking me something, ask it plain." He held her gaze. "Stay." The word crossed the desk and settled between them with more weight than any vow spoken in the church. Martha looked down at the neat paper beneath her hand, then at the scarred desk, then at the man across from her who had once told the truth about a failing ranch when a weaker man would have lied. "I have not been planning to leave," she said, "but I needed to know whether I was staying as a duty or as a choice." "As a choice," he said. "Mine if you'll have it, yours if you'll make it," she breathed once slow. "Then I stay." His face changed. Not much. Elias did not change in large ways, but something hard inside him loosened, and for the first time since she had known him, the stillness around him did not look like defense. It looked like peace beginning. 4 days later, Daniel Reeves's letter Obese by courier. Silas Vane wanted to settle. He would repay the feed overcharges, the unauthorized withdrawals and damages for the cattle lost through the Cutwater Gate if the criminal complaint could be reduced to a civil matter. Elias read the letter twice and set it flat on the kitchen table. "He wants to buy his way clean." "He wants to buy his way out," Martha said. "Clean is different. He should stand in a cell." "Maybe," she folded her hands. "But if he pays back what he took, loses the right to handle land or accounts in this county, and other ranchers are warned, then the damage stops here." Elias stared toward the window. Martha did not push him. This was not her anger to spend for him. At last he said, "Full repayment, license gone in writing, no authority over any rancher's paper again. I'll write Reeves." And Martha, "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "The sign at the gate. It should change." She went still. "It has said Crowheart Creek since I bought the place," he said. "That was true then." "It isn't the whole truth now, Elias. Crowheart and Redfern Ranch," he said. "New wood, burned letters, your name beside mine." For a moment she could hear only the stove ticking softly, and Tommy outside laughing at something Pete had dropped. Then she said, "Do it right." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I figured you'd say that. Not small letters." "No, not nailed underneath. Beside mine." She looked at him until her eyes burned. "Good," she said. "Silas paid before the end of August. His license was revoked after 2 more ranchers came forward with old receipts and quiet shame. He left Lander without farewell, and the town let him go the way towns release a man they once admired and now prefer not to remember." The new sign went up 3 days before the fall drive. Elias shaped the pine himself. Tommy held the post while Jesse sighted it straight. Pete fetched nails and dropped half of them. Taza stood near the road watching the letters darken under Elias's careful ironwork. Crowheart and Redfern Ranch. Martha stood with her arms at her sides. Nellie Frost had come out from town with a bundle of copied committee papers under one arm and said nothing for a long while. Then she wiped at one eye with the heel of her hand and muttered, "About time, a sign told the truth." Tommy stepped back and grinned. "Looks right, Mrs. Crowheart." "Yes," Martha said. "It does." The fall drive went better than any of them dared say aloud before it was done. The cattle held weight. The restored water had mattered. Taza's chosen route saved 2 days of hard pushing. Prices in Lander held strong enough that when Elias came home, dusty, hollow-eyed, and tired from honest work, Martha entered the figures into the new ledger and checked them twice. Then she closed the book. "We are solvent," she said. Elias sat very still. "Not rich," she added, "not fully recovered, but more coming in than going out. I have not heard that in 3 years, I know." He looked at her across the table, the same table where the truth had first been spread between them in ink and paper and pain. "I love you," he said. No decoration. No trembling. Just the words plain as bread. Martha's hand rested on the ledger. "I know it was not the wedding day," he said. "It was somewhere between the books and the courthouse. And every morning I found coffee waiting before I reached the door. I love you because you stood where others would have stepped aside." Martha looked at him for a long moment. "For me," she said, "it began when you admitted the ranch looked about like it was. You told the true thing when a lie would have been easier." He came around the table slowly. She stood. When he touched her face, his hands were careful but not afraid. "I love you too," she said. Late September brought Hester Vale to the ranch in a black buggy sitting stiff as a fence post and looking like she had swallowed a stone and meant to call it supper. Martha opened the door. "I came to say I was wrong," Hester said, before courage could leave her. "On the wedding day, before it, after it, I made you small in my mouth because I was small in my spirit." Martha did not say it was all right. It hadn't been. She stepped aside. "Come in, I'll put water on." They drank tea in the kitchen not as friends, but as women old enough to know that honest words cost something. Before leaving, Hester set a folded paper on the table. "The Women's Civic Committee needs someone who can read a budget." Martha almost smiled. "I will look at it." That evening, clouds came over the Wind River foothills, real clouds, heavy and blue-black, carrying the smell of wet stone before a drop had fallen. The men came out of the bunkhouse. Taza stood by the porch. Nellie, still gathering her things, paused at the doorway. Then the rain came. It struck the dust hard, darkening the yard and scattered coins that joined and spread. It drummed on the barn roof, ran down the kitchen window, soaked the garden rows, and tapped against the new pine sign at the gate. Elias stood beside Martha in the doorway and took her hand. "First rain since spring," he said. "The land needed it. So did we." Taza looked out at the water running in the ruts. Land remembers who tends it. Martha watched Tommy step into the rain, laughing Pete, following him with both arms raised. Jesse shaking his head like an old man who had decided joy was foolish, but welcome. Elias's hand tightened around hers. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing what I could not, for staying." Martha looked at the sign through the rain, her name darkening beside his. "I was never waiting to be rescued," she said. "I was waiting for a place where truth was enough, work was enough, standing firm was enough." She turned to him. "Where I was enough." The rain fell harder, washing dust from the porch steps, filling the thirsty smell of the world with life. She had never been worthless. She had only been waiting for a life honest enough to deserve her. And there, with Elias beside her, water running clean toward both forks of Crowheart Creek, and her name standing at the gate, Martha Redfern knew she had not been given a home. She had built one.